Micropulse presents The 50 Years Detective. Half a century. 5 decades tracing a map of human failure from the neon hum of the city into the dust-choked backroads of the high country. They say time heals all wounds, but 50 years of chasing ghosts across state lines has just made the scars itch. I'm Thomas Furlong, and this is just a simple narration of real detective work done on real cases handled by me. The Rohan Express robbery. The thieves are taken after a 4-month chase, and all plead guilty. The messenger duped. The Rohan Pacific Express robbery occurred near Rohan, Indiana, on what was then a part of the Wabash Railroad. The Pacific Express Company had one of their cars attached to the Wabash train, which was running between Detroit, Michigan and Indianapolis, Indiana. They left Detroit in the evening and should have arrived at Indianapolis at about 2 o'clock the following morning. One night in October 1883, the train stopped at Rohan, a small local station, and the train was boarded by 2 men. They entered from the front door of the express car and overpowered Bert Loomis, the express messenger, stuffing a large roll consisting of 2 handkerchiefs into his mouth. After tying another handkerchief around his face and then tying his hands behind his back, he was leashed with a rope to the express company's safe. They took the keys to the safe from the messenger after overpowering him and looted the safe of its contents. There were, besides much jewelry and other valuables, about $4,100 in the safe. They left the car at a point between Rohan and Peru, Indiana. When the train halted at Peru Station, the expressman rapped on the car door, and, receiving no reply, he and others forced entrance into the car door, where they found Loomis lying on his back, with his arms and shoulders tied to the safe, unconscious. They discovered indications of a struggle. There were 3 or 4 bullet holes in the side and roof of the car, the shots evidently having been fired from within. They discovered the safe open and the contents gone. Medical aid was summoned, and the doctor, after considerable trouble, succeeded in restoring Loomis to consciousness. He bore no marks of violence other than what he had suffered from the gag that had been forced into his mouth. This gag had almost cost him his life, as the ball was so large that it had prevented him from breathing hardly at all. When restored to consciousness, he stated that as the train was leaving Rohan, he was busy writing out his report, and while thusly engaged, he was pounced upon by 2 powerful men who were wearing masks. They felled him to the floor, gagged him, and bound him as he had been found, and took his keys and robbed the safe. While they were doing this, he became unconscious from the effect of the gag. He said that they had taken his pistol, which was lying on a table in front of him, and fired 2 or more shots at him, but none of the shots took effect. I was chief special agent for the Wabash Railroad, which was part of the Gould system. The case was reported to me by wire the following morning. I went to Rohan at once and was unable to obtain any information. It seemed that the robbers had not been seen by anyone in or near Rohan. They had probably been hiding and boarded the train unobserved just as it was leaving the station. I then went to Detroit, where I saw and interviewed Loomis, the express messenger. Loomis was a young man, about 26 years of age, fine-looking, about 6 feet tall, and weighed about 180 pounds. He was born and raised in Vermont. He had an older brother who was a passenger conductor on the main line of the Wabash Railroad. They had a widowed mother who was headed in Vermont. Bert, the messenger, had always lived with his mother until he took service with the Pacific Express. His standing with that company was first class. While I was making my investigations at Detroit, I met Mr. Brzee, superintendent for the Pacific Express Company. Mr. Brzee told me of Loomis's good standing with the company and spoke of him in the highest terms. I told Mr. Brzee that I was inclined to believe that Loomis might have been connected with the robbery. He vigorously discredited the idea. Loomis, you should remember, was almost dead when he was found in his car. The robbers doubtless tried to kill him, and if he had been connected with the robbery in any way, the robbers would not have tried to kill him. I knew Mr. Brzee personally, and I knew him to be a kind-hearted man and a thorough gentleman. I interviewed Mr. Fuller, the general superintendent, and all the other officers. They all spoke of him in the highest terms. I did not deem it advisable for me to inform the express authorities that I believed the express messenger was implicated, so I decided to put a shadow on Loomis's movements on each end of his route. I placed 2 of my operatives on the work, one at Indianapolis and one at Detroit. The operative at Detroit was told to take up Loomis when he left his train and not to lose sight of him. The operative in Indianapolis was likewise instructed. This was kept up continually for about 4 months. My operative at Detroit had discovered that Loomis was drinking heavily and that he was a habitual frequenter of saloons and places of ill repute. Our operative at Indianapolis reported that Loomis, while there, would leave his train and go direct to his rooming house, retire almost immediately, and remain there. I explained this to myself in this way: he needed the sleep and rest after his carousing in Detroit. My operative secured a room adjoining the room occupied by Loomis in Indianapolis, and the other one in Detroit was just as fortunate. In a short time, my Detroit man made the acquaintance of Loomis, became his chum, and was with him almost continuously. At this time, there was a private detective in Detroit whose name was Pat O'Neill. O'Neill was a widower and lived with a widow's sister who kept a rooming house, and Loomis and my operative both roomed with this widow. There was also a noted thief known as Jim O'Neill. One night, while my man in company with Loomis was sitting at a table in a beer garden in Detroit, they were approached by a man of medium size and plainly dressed. He appeared to be about 40 years old. He sat down at their table, and after they had several drinks, they engaged in a conversation in an undertone. The stranger was trying to convince Loomis that everything would be all right. Loomis was heard to say, "I have not been treated right, and this is why I have been drinking so much of late." The other man was heard to caution him about drinking so much, telling him that everything would be all right later on. My operative located the intruder and found that his name was Denny Downer, a barkeeper at a prominent saloon on Griswold Street, Detroit. I at once decided that Denny Downer, whom I had known for years as a thief, was undoubtedly one of the parties who had participated in the Rohan robbery. I had known Downer in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In fact, I was in criminal court when Downer was convicted of burglary and received a sentence of 5 years. I knew his criminal record. I decided to go to Indianapolis and take with me all the daily reports received from my 2 operatives. I requested Mr. Brzee to accompany me. We secured adjoining rooms at the Spencer House. Loomis's train was to arrive at 2 o'clock the next morning. I instructed my operative to bring him over to my room just as soon as he arrived. Loomis is at the door, and the truth is on the table. Before we step into that room for the final confrontation, take a moment to join our ranks, subscribe to Micropulse, and help our community of history sleuths grow so we can keep diving into these archives together. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from to witness this final reveal? Let us know in the comments. I prepared my room for his reception. I set a table in the middle of the room and spread the daily reports of my 2 operatives over the top of this table.
They filled it completely. Mr. Brisset was occupying a room next to mine, and I arranged to leave the door partly open so he could hear everything said. He firmly believed in Loomis's innocence. The train arrived, and the operative got Loomis, who grumbled a little, but nevertheless he came over. The operative rapped at my door, and I bade him enter. I was sitting at the table containing the reports when he opened the door and came in, accompanied by Loomis. I began by saying, "Loomis, I want to call your attention to these reports that are spread out on this table. They are the daily reports of my operatives who have shadowed you for the past 4 months. These reports set forth everything you have done and every one you have associated with. I can tell you how many cigars you have smoked, how many drinks you have taken, whom you have talked with, and what you talked about. I find that your mother is a fine old lady. I know all about your brother, and that your character heretofore has been good. For these reasons, I have taken it upon myself to give you the opportunity of telling the whole truth about this express robbery. But I want you to understand distinctly that if you do not tell the truth, I shall stop you and turn you over to the officers of the law. Now, sir, I want you to tell me how much money you received from the proceeds of that robbery." He said unhesitatingly, "Mr. Furlong, I only received $10. I could see the moisture in Loomis's eyes, and he finally began to cry. I went to the door and asked Mr. Brisset to come into my room. As he entered, I also noticed moisture in his eyes. I asked Mr. Brisset to write down what Loomis said. Loomis replied that the 2 men were Denny Downer and a friend of his who he called Little Al. Downer had induced him to let him know when he would be carrying a big run. Downer had explained that he would board his car at an out-of-the-way station and bind him without injuring him and shoot a few bullets through the side of the car so as to make it appear that he had made a fight. He finally agreed to enter the plot and learned that there was to be nearly $4,100 on that train. After the robbery, Downer sent him a letter containing $10 with the understanding that he would give him more later on, but that he had never received any more. He was now positive that they had tried to kill him by strangling him with the gag. I turned Loomis over to my operative and took the first train to Detroit, where I arrested Denny Downer. Downer acknowledged his connection and told me that Little Al was Al Perry of Boston, a noted porch climber and thief. They were both put on trial, pleaded guilty, and were sentenced to 6 years in the penitentiary. Loomis also pleaded guilty, and because he was inexperienced in crime and was persuaded by them, sentence on him was suspended. After the robbery, Pat O'Neill, the private detective, filed a claim against the express company to recover the reward. He had nothing whatever to do with obtaining the information, and therefore his claim was nothing more than an attempt to obtain money under false pretense.
Subscribe to Micropulse for upcoming episodes. Our next episode, Arrest of Lawrence Poinier.